Ole, good morning, good afternoon, and again, very early morning to you all. Welcome to the third Global Maritime um, Academy session. We'll lead off with Admiral Dhowan, who is the founder of SAMDES, the spearhead of this initiative, and we at LIST are helping with organizing this Academy series of presentations that help structure the GMA agenda, and there couldn't be anyone better placed to give a brief introduction than the former 22nd Chief of Naval Staff of the Indian Navy, Admiral Dhowan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter. At the very outset, let me accord a very warm welcome to our eminent participants, Professor Lisa Levin, Professor Patrick Lumumba, Mr. Tim Daniels, and our teams from the Liechtenstein Institute of Strategic Development, the Society for Aerospace, Maritime and Defense Studies, the Commonwealth Security Group, the International Military Council for Climate and Security Netherlands, the Trebuchet USA, the Frank Frensky Film Germany, and Sai University. And we would also like to welcome maritime experts, environment specialists, academia, as well as researchers from different parts of the world who have joined across various time zones to be with us for this third webinar of the Global Maritime Accord Academy Initiative. And the theme for today's webinar is deep ocean stewardship, avoiding the dangers of deep seabed mining. Our blue planet, the Earth, has the dominance of the maritime domain with over 70% of the Earth's surface covered by water. The oceans are rich in oil, gas, and mineral resources, and also home to over 95% of the Earth's habitat. With depletion of resources on land, humankind has turned towards the seas for mineral resources. And there is a misperception that the oceans have an unending resource base and that deep seabed mining has lesser impact on the environment than land-based mining. Nothing could be further away from reality. The reality is that the process of deep seabed mining severely disturbs the natural marine habitat, the carbon sequestration, and has a detrimental impact on the biodiversity. Due to lack of regulations, as well as inadequate knowledge on the impact on the environment, the International Seabed Authority and its 36 council members, during their meeting at Kingston, Jamaica in July 2023, have extended the timeline to revise and relook at the rules regarding the exploitation and impact of deep seabed mining on the environment as well as the health of the oceans. The oceans, as you all know, are essential to life on Earth. They are the suppliers of oxygen and cater for over 50% of our oxygen needs. They are the absorbers of carbon dioxide and silently absorb over 30% of greenhouse gases. They also have a crucial role to play in regulating the global climate. Recently, and in recent years and decades, the oceans have been under severe stress due to pollution of the seas, indiscriminate pollution, I may say, as well as the impact of the oceans in terms of the global warming which has come in. This has led to a situation which is leading to the ability of the oceans to leverage the climate change. And also what has happened is that the detrimental impact as well as the climate change issues which are being impacted due to deep seabed mining as well. The oceans are currently in a state where they are actually in hot waters because of the sea surface temperatures which are soaring, as well as the sea levels which are rising because of the global warming or global boiling, as it is now called. On the other hand, humankind continues to dump over 13 million tons of plastic garbage into the ocean, also continues to overfish, resulting in depletion of fish stock. The shipping industry, which uses the seas and the oceans as global economic highways for transit of over 80% of the world's trade, continues to spew over 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the environment. And ships in the past have been dumping ballast into the seas, which has had a damaging and a harmful impact on the microorganisms as well as aquatic life. Consequently, the International Maritime Organization has issued stringent regulations on dumping of ballast and bilges into open waters. Similarly, the creation of sediment plumes as part of the process of seabed mining will have a damaging impact on the aquatic life and microorganisms. In recent decades, there has been a renewed interest from humankind for deep seabed mining of critical minerals such as manganese, copper, the nickel, and cobalt. These are required for the clean energy resources, for the batteries for electric vehicles, for the wind turbines, as well as for the solar panels. The interest currently is in 3 major mineral resources, which is the polymetallic nodules, which are found strewn across the ocean floor at depths of about 4,000 meters, the mineral reserves in crusts, which are found on top of the underwater mountains, as well as the high sulfide deposits which form as waterspouts. Technologies have been developed to vacuum, to pluck, to cut and scrape these minerals from the seabed. The International Seabed Authority has awarded licenses to government agencies as well as the private companies for exploration in different oceans, including the Indian Ocean and the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the Pacific Ocean. The main dangers from deep seabed mining will be to the natural marine habitat, to carbon sequestration, as well as to biodiversity. Because research has indicated that the process of deep seabed mining requires high pressure jets to virtually churn up the sediments on the ocean floor to dislodge the polymetallic nodules. Technologies are also available to cut the crust and thereafter crush it into fragments, which are then pumped up to the mining ships for transportation. Studies have indicated that this process of creation of sediment plumes have a detrimental impact on aquatic life. In addition, it incurs long-term damage to the natural marine habitat of the species which are in the deep seas. They also will have a disastrous impact on the overall biodiversity and a negative impact on carbon sequestration, and could upset the delicate balance and leverage of the oceans to counter the detrimental impact of climate change. It is evident that while millions of dollars have been spent in getting the technologies and equipment for deep seabed mining, adequate research, on the other hand, has not been carried out on the holistic impact on the environment and the detrimental impact on health of the oceans. It is therefore recommended that the global deep seabed industry takes the responsibilities and works on evolving and finding environmental friendly solutions to prevent further degradation of the natural marine habitat, the biodiversity, as well as the health of the oceans. The International Seabed Authority would also need to examine all aspects on the environmental impact due to deep seabed mining prior to finalizing the rules, regulations, as well as the code for deep seabed mining. The oceans have been under severe stress because of marine pollution, because of toxic spills, because of the greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the detrimental impact of deep seabed mining. The High Seas Treaty has been adopted by the members of the United Nations in June 2023 for preservation and protection of biodiversity. This provides a window of opportunity to draft a comprehensive and a holistic action plan for the Global Maritime Accord, because a silo-based or a sectoral-based cannot meet the requirements and counter the pressures on the oceans. Therefore, to stop further degradation of the oceans, we need to conjoin forces of all stakeholders for conservation, protection, preservation, and sustainable development of the oceans and the areas beyond national jurisdiction. I'm sure that the enriching presentations and the vibrant deliberations will throw up some path-breaking suggestions and recommendations to avoid the dangers of deep seabed mining, and also contribute towards charting a comprehensive action plan for the Global Maritime Accord as a petition from the oceans, with the overall vision to save the oceans for a safe Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral Dhowan. I don't have to focus on the extraordinary security risk or danger emanating from the climate threat and from the environmental destruction that occurs. It's a local, it's a regional, it's a national, it's a global threat. It's not just a threat that emanates from the impact of climate change on migration and so forth, but it's an existential threat we all have to confront. And here we have also work to do in terms of the international climate agreements. They're primarily focused on managing or mitigating terrestrial emissions, on CO2 emissions, which is certainly important, but it won't do any good if we get the technologies we need for this emission control from the deep oceans, where we destroy or help disturb the very biological capacity to manage carbon, and the ocean being the largest carbon sink or carbon store, far outweighing the terrestrial stores and certainly the relatively small atmospheric carbon store. That equation is not figured into our COP agreements, and it needs to be much more in the forefront. And we need to point out the almost Greek tragic analogies that one finds in the ancient history of trying to achieve one objective while in fact undermining the very objective by taking those measures somewhere where they shouldn't be taken. So this is a completely new economic pressure that's going to occur on being much more careful what we mine, for what we mine, what we need, the consumption levels, and the monetary and financial signals being created to retain the oceans as such an important, vital focus for terrestrial climate stability. And that stewardship idea, no one else in the world could in fact talk with greater authority about than Professor Lisa Levin, the distinguished professor emerita at the Scripps Institution for Oceanography at the University of California in San Diego, who has a lifetime experience and career in research and publishing on the deep oceans. And she's also co-founder and the co-lead of the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. And we're delighted to have her with us this morning in California. And Lisa, I'd like to hereby invite you to take it from here. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Let me share my slides. Can you just confirm that you're seeing my slides okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. It's my pleasure today to talk about biodiversity in the deep ocean, what it is, and how we might consider protecting it in the context of seabed mining in particular. Now, you've the Admiral actually gave a great summary of my presentation, and I'm just going to delve a little bit deeper. I want to start with our definition of the deep ocean. We consider, as scientists, anything below 200 meters or about 600 feet to water depth to be deep ocean. And this means that about 95% of the habitable volume in the ocean for life is, in fact, deep ocean. Now, 1,000 years ago, seafarers believed that the deep ocean was full of monsters like the Kraken you see here. So they did actually think there was some life, but serious exploration began about 150 years ago. And the picture that emerged from the first ship-based explorations of the deep ocean was of a cold, dark, salty, very high pressure sea floor, mostly covered in mud. The idea emerged that it was very homogeneous, stable, quiet, and food limited. In other words, it was essentially a desert with very little life. But over the last 50 to 70 years, we have developed a host of new exploration tools, and these have revealed a wealth of environmental heterogeneity. We have multi-beam sonar that can map the seafloor in detail. We have other acoustic tools that can reveal gas flares, like the methane flares you see here, or that can reveal the daily migrations of plankton moving down and up in the water. We have human-operated vehicles, better known as submarines. We have remotely operated vehicles tethered to the ship, autonomous underwater vehicles not tethered to the ship, all of which, and towed camera sleds, and all these can produce images of the seafloor and allow us to explore. We have other instruments that have other kinds of chemical sensors. So all of these exploration tools have revealed, in fact, not a homogeneous seafloor, but a very diverse seafloor full of many different kinds of ecosystems. The heterogeneity is just as great as it is on land. We wouldn't call the land one ecosystem, and the deep sea is not either. We've discovered vast areas of naturally occurring low oxygen on our continental margins called oxygen minimum zones. We've discovered very large deep water plains covered with small nodules. We've discovered tens of thousands of underwater volcanoes referred to as seamounts. We've discovered thousands of canyons and fjords cut into our continental margins, and many of these have dense aggregations of filter-feeding animals like the ones you see here. Some of these, the cold water corals and sponges, can form large reefs that can extend for many kilometers and host their own biodiversity. And we've discovered chemosynthetic ecosystems like hydrothermal vents and methane seeps, where the abundant animal life relies on chemical energy rather than sunlight and photosynthesis. And perhaps the biggest realm is what we would call the mesopelagic and deep pelagic, the waters, which are perhaps the least explored. So all of these ecosystems host highly adapted species and their own biodiversity. So the deep sea is, in fact, quite biodiverse. So why does this matter? It turns out this biodiversity underpins the cycling of nutrients that fuel production in the ocean and our fisheries. The biodiversity helps act as a repository for carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's a critical part of the carbon cycle, moving carbon into the deep waters. It removes and detoxifies waste. This biodiversity provides potential solutions to some of the world's wicked problems like climate change and disease, provides food, at this point, oil and gas, new medicines, new technologies and inspiration, biomimicry. And essentially, our planet cannot be healthy without a healthy deep ocean. I'd like to point out that deep sea ecosystems host some special features that are different from those in shallow water or land that help mediate that actually do mediate the vulnerability to disturbance. Perhaps one of the most important factors is that most of the species and possibly some of the ecosystems in the deep ocean remain undiscovered. So we don't really know everything that's there. We have no baseline. Many of the animals that live in the deep ocean live a very long time and mature very slowly. It's typical for fish to be several hundred years old, and for some of the corals and sponges to be several thousand years old if undisturbed. As I mentioned, the deep sea is very heterogeneous, and this means there's a lot of habitat endemism. Animals live only in one type of habitat, sometimes in only one place. They're very dependent on hydrologic and geochemical properties. And there's a lot of mutualism where one animal depends on or lives on another. So if we damage one species, we've affected many others. And there are also very strong connections between the deep ocean and the surface ocean and across the ocean basins. And so impacts in one place will transfer to other parts of the ocean. Now, the discovery of all this habitat heterogeneity has also led to the discovery of resources. For example, in oxygen minimum zones, the bacteria sequester phosphorus, yielding phosphorites that are of interest for mining for fertilizer. The abyssal plains have polymetallic nodules, the seamounts have ferromanganese crusts, and the hydrothermal vents precipitate massive sulfides. And all of these host trace metals, copper, nickel, cobalt, zinc, and in some cases, silver and gold that are of interest to seabed mining. Our seamount, but some of the same habitats, the seamounts, well, let me go back and say the canyons are repositories for organic matter, and that ultimately over time turn into oil and gas, and we're harvesting those. The seamounts and methane seeps host aggregations of fish like the orange roughy or Chilean sea bass that you see here, and we are harvesting them as well. The coral and sponge reefs host juvenile fishes that help our fisheries, and there's now even interest in harvesting mesopelagic fish, the billions of fish that migrate up and down in the water every day. This map of seabed minerals shows you how widespread they are in our world's oceans, and as you've heard, there's growing interest in exploiting them. Just to give you a look at some of the habitats, the massive sulfides occur at hydrothermal vents. There are about 400 known vents. They represent a very tiny area. Most of the deposits, the massive sulfide deposits, are already under exploration contracts in international waters. 80% of the animals at vents live only at vents. They have a high degree of evolutionary novelty, and some of them have been red listed as endangered by IUCN simply from the threat of seabed mining, which would wipe out certain species. The ferromanganese crusts occur on seamounts, which are sites of enhanced productivity and biomass, but subject to a lot of fishing pressure. They host dense corals and sponges, which often have genetic resources, potential for medicines, and they're considered biodiversity hotspots. These are long-lived foundation species, as I said, that can live for thousands of years. The crusts themselves take form at 1 to 5 millimeters per million years. So once destroyed, they wouldn't come back very quickly. And the same is true of the polymetallic nodules on the abyssal plains. The nodules take millions of years to form, but there's interest in harvesting them. This turns out, although it doesn't look impressive, to be one of the most biodiverse habitats known on the planet. Many of the species still remain undescribed. Many of the animals aren't found elsewhere, and half of them rely on the nodules as a substrate. But the animals are very small. You get a sense looking at this relative to the size of a US penny. They're tiny and very diverse. Research in these types of nodule systems have shown that after 25 to 30 years, a simulated mining disturbance remains highly disturbed. The animal abundance, carbon stocks, and microbial activity may remain very depressed. Things happen so slowly that we know it will take centuries or more for the systems to recover. There are some restoration experiments in place in the nodule zone, putting out artificial nodules, but they won't yield valid results probably for decades. And my personal opinion is that restoration is likely not feasible in deep sea ecosystems. This is very different from land mining. Now, we've already heard a little bit about the International Seabed Authority. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea grants access to international minerals only through this UN body, the ISA. Seabed minerals are designated as the common heritage of mankind by the Law of the Sea, and this means the benefits from minerals mining need in international waters, the areas shown in pink here, need to be shared globally. But the ISA is also mandated to adopt measures necessary to ensure effective protection of the marine environment from the harmful effects of mining. So the International Seabed Authority has issued 31, or it's possibly now up to 32 international exploration contracts for deep seabed mining in these 3 different resource types. You can see they occur in the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Ocean. A lot of activity has focused on polymetallic nodules in the Clarion-Clipperton zone off of Mexico in the Pacific. And here, many countries have exploration contracts, no exploitation contracts yet. But these areas are huge, and mining would cover a vast area. And just to put this in perspective, you can see that 1 year of mining under one contract would cover 2.5 times the area of the largest coal mine in Germany. And this would expand very rapidly over the 20 years required for a viable mining effort. Now, you've already heard from the Admiral that mining has many harmful effects. Harmful effects is actually a legal term in the regulations. This is what has to be avoided to protect the marine environment. Mining will remove animals directly from the footprint and alter the substrate that they depend on. Mining can release contaminants from the seabed. It alters the geochemistry that the animals depend on. It produces loss of structure that they depend on. It changes food webs. It releases massive amounts of sediment, creating a plume that can interfere with feeding activities, visual activities. Mining produces a lot of sound, light, and vibration in the setting that's not normally there, and overall a tremendous amount of physical disruption. Now, a lot of attention is on the seafloor, but mining doesn't just affect the seafloor. We know that there is a lot of interactions between the water and the seabed. Mining returns, it's called return water from the ship after the ore is removed, and it puts it back into the ocean, also releasing additional sediments along with noise, light, and vibration. And there's concern that this will affect the animals in the water column. Many animals have migrations that cross the Clarion-Clipperton zone, like leatherback turtles and whale sharks. There are also fisheries that occur in the waters overlying this area. There are important tuna fisheries, and there was a recent paper that showed that their climate change is moving the fisheries towards the Clarion-Clipperton zone, or the fish, I should say, and that the overlap between tuna fisheries for Pacific Island nations and the mining target areas will be increasing in overlap. You've already heard mention of the carbon cycle. There are a lot of questions about how mining will affect the carbon cycle, either by releasing carbon from the seafloor in the mining footprint, or by affecting the animals that underpin the carbon cycle, like the vertically migrating plankton in the waters above, or by animals like the mass migrations of big mammals and reptiles that move carbon across the oceans. There are new processes being discovered in the deep ocean, deep sea carbon fixation and oxygen production that are occurring in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, and we don't know how those would be affected. And mining also offers threats to cultural heritage and traditional knowledge in regions where mining is targeted. So what can we do for protection? I want to point out that environmental management is a very important part of the deep sea mining regulations, and that, as I said, there's only exploration contracts right now, but we are poised to have exploitation contracts. However, the International Seabed Authority has yet to develop overarching strategic and environmental goals and objectives against which to develop all these regulations. They have yet to define the thresholds for serious harm, a legal term that would prevent mining. They have regional environmental management plans required for each mining area, however, region. However, only one of these exists for the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. They don't exist for the Indian or Atlantic Oceans. Part of the REMPs, or Regional Environmental Management Plans, are the designation of areas of particular environmental concern, or APEIs. These are protected areas. And I'll talk more about those. And then the contracts, each of the contracts within a region will have to do environmental impact assessment, management and monitoring plans, and designate preservation reference zones and impact reference zones as part of their monitoring. So the protected areas are a very important part of the environmental planning. Here you can see in the hatched squares, the APIs for the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, and you'll notice that they circle the many exploration contracts. Only one falls in the middle, a recent addition, but for the most part, they're around the contract areas. And it turns out now that people are exploring these regions, which are huge, that the habitats are actually quite different than the main areas mining minerals. So this raises questions about whether they actually will do a good job of preserving identical species. Recently, there was a survey of knowledge gaps in the arena of mining management, and led by Diva Aman, published last year. And this survey of many experts found that only 1% of the scientific topics assessed across mineral exploration contract areas had sufficient information to enable evidence-based management of deep seabed mining. So there are huge knowledge gaps. And despite this, several countries have and states have undertaken test mining as the first step in mining. Now, I don't have time in this presentation to go through all of the gaps, but let me just say there are a lot of gaps in our baseline understanding of what lives in the mining areas targeted for in the areas targeted for mining, but also gaps in applied knowledge, understanding what's harmful to these, how extensive will the impacts be, how will ecosystem services, things humans depend on, be affected, how long will it take for the systems to recover. All of these are incredible knowledge gaps that have yet to be filled, and these gaps have really driven a movement for a moratorium for mining. Here you can see the timeline of countries. There are now 22 countries that have signed on to some type of proposed moratorium or precautionary pause. There are also a host of car companies, fishing organizations, financial institutions, NGOs, and indigenous groups that have signed on to a moratorium. And a few companies have vowed not to source deep sea metals should they be produced by deep seabed mining. And then beyond the International Seabed Authority's management of mining, it's going to be essential that mining activities become compatible with other international agreements focused on biodiversity, on climate, on pollution, on fisheries, and that mining does not counter our sustainable development goals, especially goal 14. And I've been talking about the international realm, but I do want to point out that there are a lot of countries interested in mining within their exclusive economic zones. Some of these may well be the first to mine. And I think, this is, we just don't know what's going to happen yet, but I'll leave you with a parting message that to protect for biodiversity, we must proceed with caution when it comes to deep seabed mining. And with that, I'll stop and thank you all.
Thank you very much, Lisa, Professor Levin, for a fantastic presentation, very thorough, detailed, and yet succinct, and I wanted to just ask you perhaps one question. I wanted to ask you about your last sentence where you said we must proceed with caution, but that also means we must proceed. Um, what I mean, there's a number of companies and also countries that are determined to say, well, we must not proceed. Is there a foregone conclusion that there will be either a broadly accepted move into mining and we must proceed with caution, or is there still a connective tissue that connects our biodiversity interests, our carbon management interests, our realization that protecting 30% of the ocean is like giving your laptop computer to a repair shop and you only get 30% back and you hope it to be functioning? These sort of linkages between the systems and the sectoral pursuits of sustainability. Are you confident that this connective tissue of concern can be strengthened in order to perhaps make underwater mining a marginal activity at best, even if it's not even already marginal from an economic point of view?
Okay, I probably did give the wrong impression with my words. However, in my mind, I am looking at the development of regulations now at the ISA, and that is not going to stop. And so I cannot speak to whether I have my personal opinions about, whether we should be mining the deep sea or not. However, this is a very complex problem that's not only about the environment, and it's not only about, economics plays a role, equitability and environmental justice plays a role. There's all sorts of issues here. However, proceed with caution means be cautious at this point about everything we're doing, including the development of regulations, any kind of testing that goes on. You cannot deny, I showed you this list of companies, of countries that are looking at mining their own exclusive economic zones. It's not realistic to assume that because 22 countries want a moratorium and because many, many other people want a moratorium, that everything's going to stop. So proceed with caution means that on all phases in everything we're doing, we need to look very carefully at whether we want to do this or not, as well as, going ahead, how we go ahead.
Okay. Well, a clear message in the presentation, albeit a pragmatic view in the end, which if we pursue the pragmatic view in our recommendations can reinforce those elements in the pragmatic view we want to move ahead. And so maybe we can rely on a partnership with the Global Maritime Accord, that we pursue the activist side and object to the proceeding part and support you in your cautionary principles. But we need to take a strong stance. And if we don't, we'll find ourselves in a moving baseline position moving forward in a way that we may not be able to control. But this is a very important contribution. So I wanted to thank you again for that. And it's seminal to our interest.
Yeah, let me just say, I truly believe we are not ready, anywhere near ready to mine now. So I am not advocating for mining ultimately at all, but the main point is we should not be doing it.
Wonderful.
Right now.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize for taking a dialectic position here for a minute, but it's wonderful. There couldn't be anyone else better placed perhaps than our guest from Kenya, Professor Lumumba, who's been working on the laws of the sea and also UNCLOS principles on averting the danger of seabed mining for some time. And he's also an advocate of the high courts of Kenya and Tanzania, and lecturing at the University of Nairobi. And he's also director of the Kenya School of Law. So I wanted to ask Patrick to give your view on what can be done, what the law should do to pursue not just caution, but also the question of how we protect the assets we still have before we extract the assets we may have, and lose the assets we do have. Professor Lumumba.
Thank you very much. I've keenly listened to the presentation by the Admiral and the Professor, and there is a sense in which all of us will agree that,
Proceed with caution while you drive on the highway to Nairobi.
No,
Okay.
I'm actually not driving, I'm static.
Okay.
But I'm saying that having listened to the presentation, there is no doubt in my mind that the reality is that some mining will happen at some stage. The other reality is that on the basis of the evidence that we have now, we do not have sufficient scientific information to give us the courage to mine without destabilizing the biodiversity that is accepted as common heritage. And the duty of all countries and international organizations that are charged with the task of ensuring that we do not destabilize the oceans any further is therefore to ensure that we proceed at this stage with very carefully guided exploration. And exploration is important in this regard so that we are better able to understand what resides in the deep seas and how it can be exploited in a manner that does not disrupt or undermine the equilibrium which is so very necessary for purposes of the very survival of humanity. We know, for example, that we are at a stage where we don't even understand the depths of what happens in our territorial seas or in the exclusive economic zones. And therefore, to venture into the arena of deep sea mining is, in a manner of speaking, flying blind. And what one therefore would say, riding on what has already been articulated by the good professor, is to proceed on the premise that there is need for greater cooperation. And I say this coming from the global south, in the knowledge that the global north tends to be very gung-ho about many things. You may have conferences in Montego Bay or in Kingston, Jamaica. You may have good regulations. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea may make prescriptions. But when countries begin to act unilaterally, and we are beginning to see unilateralism taking center stage in very many areas, and the law of the sea is not going to be spared, even as we have all these conferences that are telling us that there is danger to the earth, that the climate is under threat. We know that the appetite for having minerals which are not subject to any restrictions is going to be the guiding principle. So we must, in the nature of things, look to the day when we will proceed beyond exploration to go into the arena of exploitation. And the question, therefore, is how are we going to move into that space in a manner that ensures that our general interests are protected globally? It is therefore going to be important that there is very rigorous environmental monitoring. But the question is, who will do it? The countries in the global north may have the capacity and the technology to do it, but will they do it in a manner that is sensitive to the interests of those who do not have the technological capacity? The answer is no. And therefore, one will require greater and more intimate collaboration. I'll say this because it's something that I know very well. Many countries in the global south, which will be affected by this kind of activities, do not have the technological capacity, they do not have the financial muscle, and many times they depend and consume information that is handed down to them by the powers that have the capacity. So going forward, environmental monitoring is going to be very critical, and it must be done at the regional level, and it must also be done at the global level. Easier said than done, in the knowledge that we do not have the capacity, even when you consume science that has not been properly understood, you will not have the capacity to determine whether it is the science that you want to consume or it is science that has been massaged in order to allow others to proceed. The second thing is that technology in this area must be the kind of technology that is shared. We talk about different parts of the world, the Indian Ocean, and we talk about innovative science, but will countries such as the United States of America or Russia or China, which are developing their appetite for exploitation and exploration and exploitation, and the companies from that part of the world, will they have the desire to share information? And the answer is no, they will not. They will not, because the world is still ruled by the law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest and the dying of the least suitable. We who are in the academic space may think otherwise or say otherwise or be diplomatic about it, but this is cutthroat. And therefore, even as we prescribe these things as rules of the thumb, we must be aware that many of them will be honored in breach. But by means of mere prescription, I think innovative technology is going to be very critical in order for us to understand the deep seas. And of course, in the area of navigation, who are the players once again in this arena of navigation? Those who are the great players are the global north, if you may. And in a nutshell, therefore, without belaboring and repeating what has been said, it is now known and recognized that we are not ready technologically. We do not have the science that gives us the confidence to delve into the arena of exploitation. It therefore beggars belief that there are those who want to move very quickly from exploration into exploitation. But how are we going to stop them? From the calmness of our chairs where we sit, it is easy to say that we are going to. But when they choose to move, history has demonstrated not once, not twice, that they are going to ignore. And even in the name of exploration, I suspect that some exploitation is already going on. And what is going to happen is that we are going to cause a major disequilibrium, with the consequence that what we are worried about now, about the boiling of the earth, and what we are worried about, environmental disruption, the sinking of the smaller islands, and the biodiversity being disturbed, all these may happen in our very lifetimes, because we have demonstrated that we have a culture of disrespecting what is prescribed. I say this because I'm very familiar with the exclusive economic zone and what countries are expected to do within it. And you and me know that many countries ignore the circumscription that is placed on the exclusive economic zone to the detriment of the smaller and poorer nations. In a nutshell, therefore, my prescriptions are three, which are textbook prescriptions, which I know will be ignored. Let us engage in environmental monitoring. Let us have more collaboration in terms of innovation, innovative technology. And number three, let us ensure that proper navigation and proper scientific support exists before we move from exploration to exploitation. I rest my short case. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. A very roundly argued position, and certainly one that's in keeping with our economic maxims at this moment and the structure of incentives we have constructed ourselves in our short-term revenue-driven global economy. And yet we need to find ways of those principles that you've espoused to be supported by mechanisms that may be both economic, but also ethical and visionary, that still are founded on a legal and a cooperative pragmatism that pushes us forward. And I'd like to perhaps draw this to a discussion at the end and ask Lisa Levin at the end, and also Admiral Dhowan to comment, but not before I ask our London guest, Tim Daniel, who specializes in public international law and has devoted his career to aspects of the law of the sea, and he's also quite enamored with the focus on the Clarion-Clipperton zone of Hawaii, and he'd like to share with us some of his views. Tim, would you like to come online and turn on your camera? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, off you go.
Okay, well, good day, everyone. I'm most grateful to the GMAA for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts on seabed mining and associated issues. It is a subject close to my heart, being part of the future on this planet for my 4 children and 12 grandchildren. By way of introduction, I would like to underline the importance of CCZ, the Clarion-Clipperton zone of Hawaii. The zone has, as we know, attracted a great deal of attention over the past 20 or 30 years, both because of the known proliferation of polymetallic nodules on the seabed in this area, but also, of course, because of its commercial potential as a source of certain minerals, including those generally termed rare earth. I know from my own experience that the weight of the commercial interests that want to exploit these deep seabed deposits, but what has really only recently become apparent, as was clear from what Professor Levin was saying, is the extraordinarily important role, for example, the dead and decomposed phytoplankton down there plays in all life on Earth as we know it. The disturbance of those deposits by deep sea mining has potentially catastrophic consequences, as I shall explain further below. I believe that the GMAA can play a crucial role in the preservation of the zone. As a first step, I would advocate that the GMAA should endeavour to set in motion an application for the zone to be classified as a marine protected area. This would involve the United States and Hawaii. The Academy may wish to consider a direct approach to Hawaii on this. It is arguably the most important environmental project any institution can undertake in the world today. I will now also outline some further steps I believe the GMAA can take in pursuit of these objectives in 3 parts: legal, political, and other. Legal aspects. 2 climate change advisory opinions are currently being sought before the relevant UN tribunals, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, based in The Hague, and the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ICLOS, based in Hamburg. Deep sea mining and its implications for the climate are manifest. In particular, impacts on the planet's oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. See my short papers submitted to the GMA in August and September 2023. One was called Clarion-Clipperton, A Personal Odyssey, and the other, The Perils of Disturbing the Deep Ocean Floor in Pursuit of Short-Term Resource and Economic Gain. See especially a reference to the pioneering work of Louis Maillard, a French chemist who, as long ago as 1916, described the process now dubbed the Maillard reaction, which scientists from the University of Leeds have recently argued could have been responsible over millions of years for creating necessary conditions for life on Earth. The Leeds study describes how on the deep ocean floor, iron and manganese, as found in the nodules which proliferate in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, slow the decomposition of the microscopic organisms found down there, which serve to lock countless millions of tons of organic carbon deep underwater, rather than it being released into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. This capture, over millennia, increased the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere and helped stabilize climatic variations on land, thus enabling complex life forms to flourish on Earth. In the ICJ, the current request is entitled obligations of states in respect of climate change. 20th September 2023, the court authorized the Organization of African, Caribbean and Pacific States, the OACPS, the Melanesian Spearhead Group, MSG, and the Forum Fisheries Agency, FFA, at their request, to participate in the advisory proceedings on the obligations of states in respect of climate change. The court had this to say: pursuant to Article 66 of its statute, the court has decided that the OACPS, MSG, and FFA are likely to be able to furnish information on the questions submitted to the court by the General Assembly. The three organizations may therefore each present a written statement on those questions and written comments on any written statements made by states or other organizations within the time limits fixed by the President of the court, in her order of 4th August 2023, namely 22nd of January 2024 and 22nd of April 2024, respectively. Subsequent procedure has been reserved for further decision. The Academy should, in my view, endeavour to make contact with one or all of the above-named entities in order to explore the possibility of furnishing further materials to them which may assist them in the preparation of their written statements, perhaps as one of the other organizations referred to in the court order, and within the prescribed time limits, which I'm afraid are not very far away. As far as the request to ITLOS is concerned, public hearings concluded on the 25th of September 2023, and the tribunal will now deliberate on the submissions made, thus precluding further representations at this time. With regard to political aspects, the GMAA should, in my view, write to David Lammy, MP. He is currently Shadow Foreign Secretary, but if, as seems increasingly likely, a Labour government is elected in 2024, he's expected to be appointed Foreign Secretary. David was a trainee with my old firm, DJ Freeman. Many years ago, I took him with me on a visit to his ancestral home in Guyana to meet members of the government there. We remain in touch, and a couple of months ago, he gave a well-received talk at the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law here in London on the recently concluded Oceans Treaty and the importance of the UK securing, with other states, a moratorium on deep-sea development. I will also write to Fleur Anderson, Labour MP for my home constituency of Putney in southwest London. She is very much on side and is at present a very effective backbencher who may well be promoted in a Labour administration. And incidentally, Greenpeace have posted draft letters to send to MPs as part of their lobbying campaign. Thirdly, other avenues which might be explored further by the GMAA include, firstly, a direct approach to the ISA, the International Seabed Authority in Kingston. They are, of course, the body charged with the implementation of the Oceans Treaty. GMAA could write to the Secretary-General, Michael Lodge, whom I know personally. This might be done in conjunction with my colleague, Professor Edwin Egedi of Cardiff University, who spoke at the last GMAA webinar, and who is a member of the ISA Technical Committee.
We have to come to a closure.
Sorry?
We have to come to a close.
No, I've only got 3 more points. A recent development in the creation of the Commonwealth Blue Economy, recent development is the creation of the Commonwealth Blue Economy Initiative, promoted by the Commonwealth Secretariat, representing the 56 Commonwealth states. They've set up 8 study groups whose reports can be found on the ComSec website. These reports do not include deep sea mining, something which I would like to see the Academy rectify. Lastly, my professional links with the federal government of Nigeria and the work I did with them on the maritime boundaries in the Gulf of Guinea look likely to enable me to make contact on behalf of the GMAA with the newly formed Blue Economy Ministry in Nigeria, who will be extremely interested in the work we are doing. Finally, perhaps I could say that the GMAA may also wish to consider critically a recently completed PhD dissertation authored by a very talented postgraduate Canadian student who is supervised by an old colleague of mine, Professor Aldo Circo at Dalhousie University. His thesis is entitled A Sustainable Seabed Mining Asset Valuation Code. A few years ago, Aldo was rapporteur for a symposium in which I participated at Chatham House on issues associated with the implementation of Article 82 of UNCLOS, which of course sets out criteria applicable for exploitation of the continental shelf beyond areas of national jurisdiction, now, as we know, referred to as being part of the common heritage of mankind. And lastly, the GMAA might consider creating a photographic brochure inspired by the current Wildlife Photographer of the Year exhibition. There are many extraordinary undersea images of creatures which inhabit the deep seabed. Copyright issues would need to be explored, but as we know, one picture can be worth 1,000 words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Tim Daniel, that's a very well plumbed survey of the issues, and I appreciate both the bold vision and the institutional references you made, but also the series of personal references we made, and something for Admiral Dhowan and us to pick up on and to pursue. But if Lisa Levin is still with us, I'd like to invite her to just close the content part of the explorations with that by a reflection on this hour, and then ask Admiral Dhowan to do the same from the point of view of the GMA. And I will thank you already in advance because we'll close the session right after that. Thank you. Lisa, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Well, I guess, it should be apparent to everybody, mining is more complex than maybe people originally thought. One thing I failed to mention in my presentation was that technology is moving on, and many of the minerals being targeted by deep seabed mining are not present in new electric car battery technologies like iron phosphate batteries. We also have a host of recycling and reuse initiatives that ultimately will change our demand. So the decisions about deep seabed mining may ultimately not be made by the science or the environment, environmental concerns, but could be economic and in terms of supply and demand. And I just want to leave people with that thought. But there is still a lot to be said about the environment and protecting biodiversity. Thank you. In the deep sea.
Thank you very much. And that is also something that resonates very well with Tim's focus on local, organizational, and also political activism, which will build on the positive responses this innovation can take, taking the demand away from what otherwise would be a resource that could indeed be destructive, but without the demand will not have the economic base to proceed. Admiral Dhowan, would you like to wrap this hour and allow us to send you back onto your middle watch?
Thank you very much, Peter. I must thank all our participants for bringing to focus the fact that the oceans today are under severe threat. And deep seabed mining is certainly not going to help the cause. It will further degrade the natural marine habitat. It will degrade the capability and the leverage the oceans have to actually support life on Earth, and the capacity they have to counter the detrimental impacts of global warming and climate change. So, as has been mentioned by Professor Lisa Levin, that we would have to actually proceed with great caution if we have to, because certainly deep seabed mining is not helping any cause. It is only going to aggravate the situation. And as has been highlighted by Professor Lumumba, we will have to make sure that the various organizations take the correct stand. And as Tim Daniel has said, that we will have to take specific measures and initiatives as the GMA to take this battle, as it were, to the right organization at the right levels with the right fora to make sure that we can actually preserve the oceans, save the oceans for a safe earth, and see that deep seabed mining, the overall environmental aspects are totally understood before humankind ventures into the last bastion of the deep seas, which are so important for survival and life on Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you all, and have a good day and evening and night. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Peter. Lisa?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all.
Hope to talk to you all again.